Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Disgustingly Resilient podcast, Death Guard Fundamentals 10th Edition. In this episode, we're going to be taking a deep dive into allies, why you should bring them, why you shouldn't bring them, and why do we even consider it in the first place. So, just a quick heads up before we jump into it. This is probably going to be the last of the unit deep dives. In this one, we are not covering Forge World choices, the reason being that most Forge World units aren't the greatest anyway, but for those that are looking at Forge World, usually you will have those people be more competent with the game, more comfortable, understand it more. So those people probably can make their own judgments. I just want to focus on the plastic range that is available and the one that is easily obtainable to everybody. So just bear that in mind going forward. Now, we did record this episode already, unfortunately. I did have Will with me that time. That's not the unfortunate part. But the audio quality on that one basically got damaged and it was unable to save it. So this is the second time recording it. I have made a few edits. Unfortunately, Will can't be with me this time just due to scheduling. I need to get this out. And that recording unfortunately has been left in the wayside. But do not worry, me and Will are still good. He has a podcast episode up at the moment as well. Please check that out. Show him some support. He goes over his RTTs that he's been attending with his new list. And he's gone over his learning experience with Death Guard. And it's a very good and interesting episode, so I'd appreciate if you show him some love. On that topic, obviously if you enjoy what you're seeing and you enjoy the content we are putting out, then please feel free to leave a like and a subscribe. It really helps more than first thought. The YouTube algorithm is a nasty monster at times when it wants to be, as I'm learning. So the every like and every subscribe helps massively. We're almost at 2.5k. So obviously that might be the case by this time. We want to celebrate that with a giveaway, so keep your eyes open for that coming up. Basically, if you wish to support us, the extra step, feel free to consider becoming a YouTube member. Just below. People who become a member get access to our Discord. You get to vote on upcoming content. I'm working on the next Perfect Plague, which has been voted to be Eldar. Yay, thanks guys. But any support at all is appreciated, even just a like, a subscription, a share, anything. But anyway, for now, that's enough of me rambling. Let's get into the good stuff. So, why do we even consider allies in the first place? Well, one of the main things when we look at why we want to bring an ally unit along, and for those wondering, allies for Death Guard basically are categorized into three different things. So, you can either bring, I think it's up to 500 points of Nurgle Chaos Daemons, or on the night side, you can pick one of two options. So you can include up to 3 War Dogs, or one large knight, basically. So 3 mini knights or 1 large knight. You can't do stuff like 1 large, 2 small, but you can, for example, bring 500 points of demons and then a large knight if something you really want to do. So just to clarify what options are available to us. However, if you bring demons for the Demon Codex, they have to be Nurgle demons. You can't bring Khorne, you can't bring Tzeentch, you can't bring Slaanesh. So just be aware, only going to be the Nurgle demons for us. So why consider allies in the first place? Well, one of the main things and one of the main reasons people bring allies along is to fill gaps that are left by your codex or index, by your own actual army roster. So this can include tools for some armies such as lone operatives. Unfortunately, Chaos and Death Guard especially don't have access to lone ops. We literally can't take any. If there was an option to take one, I guarantee you we would, because that is a giant gap in our army roster. However, that is not something that can be filled. However, Death Guard have no natural option for units that can infiltrate. However, as we'll see, some of our allies options actually can allow us to do that, which actually is a tool that we don't normally have. So this is a great example of why you might want to bring a unit that has tools that your army itself doesn't have. This can range from anything as simple as my army lacks anti-tank weapons, so let's look for allies with anti-tank weapons, all the way to more unique things such as, I don't know, maybe you've got some really skew idea and you want a unit that can mess around with the opponent's OC. again, maybe that's something you're looking allies for, as we'll see. But that's the general gist of why we even consider allies in the first place. Another reason is cross synergy. So not all rules are locked to your faction. A lot are, and the majority are. So let's not get that wrong. However, there do exist instances where units from another book can have rules or effects that can complement those from another book. So again, we've got a few examples in here which we will cover and we'll talk about as we go through. But there's also rules where our rules as Death Guard can benefit our allies that we bring along. So looking for these cross synergy pieces can open up avenues what maybe turn what is normally considered an okay unit into a great unit. So allies are important for that. Another option is mission play. So sometimes a book can have a really good killing power but can really struggle on the mission play. This is more commonly seen if you are playing an army like Knights or Custodes, for example. They have amazing killing power with their Knights, but sometimes they don't have, well, not sometimes, they literally don't have access to cheap units in their book, which can just be brought along to do things such as actions or just playing mission. You don't want to be spending 160 points on an Armiger or a War Dog to be doing actions that could be being done by something like a 50-point unit of like Guardsmen or 35-point Nurglings, as we'll see soon. So it can really help out mission play. Means you can spend the majority of your points on your core army, focusing around the strengths of that army and what it does well, and then you can use those allies to basically shore up any weaknesses you might have on the mission. Another reason people consider is to help benefit list archetypes. So if you've watched the list building video, we're aware that there are lists called skew lists, and skew lists really want to get certain profiles and spam them to the maximum possible they can. So for example, if you were playing Death Guard and you wanted to bring a high toughness Demon Engine skew, then you might bring your Plague Burst Crawlers, you've brought Mortarion, maybe you even brought a Land Raider, and you're looking elsewhere now to think, what other powerful high toughness units can I bring along? Maybe we look at Knights, maybe we look at Great Unclean Ones. If they fit the archetype of toughness 10 plus, they could be something we can put into our list that works in the actual list archetype, but they still have to do enough work on their own. You can't just bring some up because it's toughness 12, it has to be toughness 12 and do something. And obviously the last rule is obviously the rule of cool. We love this hobby, and one of the reasons we do love this hobby is because the models look fucking awesome. Let's not lie. The models look fantastic. So, in the fact that they look so good, it's very natural that you probably want to expand outside of just your own army, and you maybe want to bring some units, but you don't want to commit to buying an entire second army, so you look at allies choices. Great Unclean One is a fantastic model. All the Chaos Knights, also again, I really like the look of, so being able to pick them up, still play them alongside your main faction, and not have to worry about getting a full 2k before you could even get it on the board is a fantastic and really cool thing. So just remember, no matter what we cover here today, rule of cool, if you're just a casual player, or even if you're competitive, as long as you understand the impact of including cool units in your list has, then there's no such thing as a bad unit. If playing a unit makes you smile and makes you happy and makes you excited to play, run that unit. So just remember that as we go through. So, let's have a quick sip of drink. 1 second. So, what makes a good ally though? So one thing that can make a good ally is if they have unique abilities that aren't found within your own army. This can be stuff like Vect effects. Now for those listening who don't understand what a Vect effect is, the reason we call an effect a Vect effect is back in an old edition, Dark Eldar had a stratagem called Agents of Vect, which would basically, you would use when your opponent would use a stratagem, and for the rest of the game that stratagem would cost 1 command point more. Now these abilities are found actually on units these days, so lots of units have the ability to cause the opponent's stratagem to cost 1 command point more for the rest of the game. But just because Dark Eldar did it first, we often refer to it as a Vect, as the stratagem was known as Agents of Vect. So if you ever hear someone say, do you have a Vect, or I'm going to Vect that, it usually means, well, not usually, it does mean, they're going to increase the command point ability of that stratagem by 1 for the rest of the game. That's a unique ability that some armies can bring along. Imperium armies especially bring it for the Caladius Assassin. Maybe they have another ability that, for example, could reduce toughness, which obviously then we could stack with our own abilities, as we might see later. Units, like as we said before, with Lone Operative, they're quite unique. Not every army has access to them naturally. So all these unique abilities can be used as tech pieces or as part of the actual game plan itself. So a unit that brings something unique is naturally going to have more value to it, providing the abilities, of course, usable and not just a gimmick, than units that just have stat lines and not really anything unique. So that's one reason. Another reason we bring allies and what makes a good ally is synergy. So for example, you can have units that provide benefits or debuff opponents in a way that could synergize with your army's natural rules. So for example, in this one, we could have a unit of War Dogs, Brigands, as we'll cover later. They get -1 AP versus the closest target. Now this is strong, ridiculously powerful in certain aspects. Getting extra AP for free is very strong, but it gets to ridiculous points when you bring them in Death Guard, and we have an aura that also reduces saves by 1. So now you have a unit effectively getting +2 AP to its weapons, which is obviously really good synergy between them and quite crazy. So finding synergy between armies is incredibly important. It's rarer these days than it used to be. GW did a lot of effort since 8th edition to try and stop cross-faction benefits, but there are still some outliers out there that do work. Cost efficiency. Sometimes the unit in the other book does the same job as the unit in your book, but it's just way better at it for cheaper. It's kind of upfront as it is. Sometimes you want a unit to do a job, the unit in your allies book does the job much better for cheaper, therefore it becomes a question of why are you not running that unit instead of your own. So cost efficiency does play a plan. Answers to the meta. So the meta, for anyone that's been playing for a long time, constantly changes. It's why I always say to play the army you love, don't meta chase, because the meta constantly changes. There are armies that are historically always pretty good and pretty strong, but it does always change. It always fluctuates. So sometimes you have no access to units, or maybe limited access to units, which are going to be really important in certain meta matchups. For example, if we have Eldar running absolutely everywhere at the moment, maybe an army, someone running their army, is going to look for some form of indirect, whether from their own army or others, because Eldar like bringing lots of 1 wound, toughness free, squishy infantry to play missions. And what do those units really hate? Indirect fire. So that would be an answer you're looking for, as well as being a unique ability if you don't have indirect from another army. So again, as the meta changes and shifts, units that might be considered not great allies one day could suddenly find themselves in the golden seat. It's just the way it happens. And last but not least, does it do a better job? So this kind of comes back to cost efficiency. If a unit, so for example, you're bringing an anti-tank gun, it's got like 1 shot, it's 70 points, it's got d6 plus 3 damage, but it hits on a 3, it's not too bad. But then your ally book has an option for maybe 75 points, so it's a little more expensive, but it gets 2 of those shots. Maybe it's on a slightly slower chassis, but it's both, 6 inches to 4 inches, it's not a huge difference. So does that one not just do a better job of the role you want to bring it for, which in that instance would be that high damage, high output shooting to kill tanks? And if the answer is yes, that would therefore make that a pretty good allied option to bring along. So these are all things we need to consider when we look at units, which we're about to do, and deliberate why they are good, if they are good, and what is it that's making them good, what are they bringing to our army, and what can our army offer them. Okay, but what makes a bad ally? Unfortunately, not every ally is a good choice. Again, rule of cool, obviously, but When we're on this podcast, we're talking about competitive Death Guard, so we're trying to focus on the more efficient choices, shall we say. So a bad ally, bad in quotation marks, would be a unit that has rule redundancy. For example, it's not very good if you have, for example, an ally that can generate command points, but we also have a talisman that can generate command points, and let's say our guy is just more reliable at doing it. You could technically bring the other fella, but there's not much point when we already have that rule. You're capped at 1 command point a turn anyway, so it's kind of just redundant with itself. You see this a lot with certain allies that basically have effects that sort of mimic what you already have. A great example is some of the Nurgle heralds, as we'll go through, have rules that are auras of battle shock reduction, yet we already have access to units that can do that as well as a contagion. So if it ever actually did become an important mechanic, we can already quite easily get auras of -3 leadership, at which point the redundancy is just kicking in. Another great one, as we'll see in a second, is Plague Bearers. Sticky objectives don't really matter in an army where your entire army has sticky objectives. It's just wasted rules. Another one is faction locked rules. As we said before, not every army has rules that can benefit each other. Certain units have rules that clearly specify it only benefits units from their own army. This becomes problematic because although yes, you can bring more allies along, you're not going to get enough usually to make that an efficient choice, and it's not going to benefit any of your actual main army units. So locking rules to faction can really hamper how good something is as an ally. Again, as we said before, less efficient choice. If that ally does a job, but you have units naturally in your book that do the job better for cheaper, then generally there's no real reason to bring that ally along because your units themselves just do the same job but better. And also units that lack purpose. So, for example, if you're in an army that's really good at close range brawling, bring in extra units that can, from an ally's point, that also brawl is kind of lacking a purpose because you already do that so naturally well anyway. That doesn't mean they're useless because brawling's brawling good, but if it doesn't have a reason to be brought over other things, why are you really bringing it in the first place? So just consider this. So I don't want to spend a lot of time talking about certain units and why they're bad. I could do if that's something that interests you, but I don't want to sit here and be repeating myself over and over. So I've decided to actually just sort of get the worst of the worst, put them here, and the rest we're going to break down and go through ourselves. So suboptimal allies, in my opinion, again, everything is subjective, but in my opinion, all of the Nurgle heralds are kind of bad. They all want to be joined to Plague Bearers, and all their rules basically only affect the Plague Bearers. I think there's a couple of them have a niche way to basically force battle shock, but again, that's not really something we're massively struggling with. We have Plague Burst Crawls that can do that. We have a contagion if battle shock's going to become really important. So they just don't really do much. Again, the main problem is that they work with Plague Bearers, and Plague Bearers are really not needed in Death Guard. The Plague Bearer special rule is sticky objectives, which we naturally have on our entire army, so it's extremely redundant. They're fairly expensive to just be a chaff unit. They don't deal much damage. The only thing they've kind of got going for them is that they have innate deep strike, but again, there's not really much place where I look at Plague Bearers and find them having a use. Plague Marines, being so cheap at the moment, are kind of just more efficient. They're also harder to kill. They're tougher in general. They're better output on them. So the fact that you'd be a hard sell to make me take Plague Bearers, because I think they're not very good. Their rule is redundant. Their efficiency is not there. They don't really have a purpose. And therefore, all the characters that kind of joins that unit and buff that unit, because all those units have abilities that work on the Plague Bearer unit they join. Again, you're trying to polish a turd, as you'd say in English. You're trying to, you can polish a turd as much as you want, but it's not going to become a diamond no matter how hard you scrub. The next one is the War Dog Huntsman. This is the Thermal Spear and Reaper Chain Talon War Dog. I don't really find these guys to have too much of a use. They have reroll 1s to wound and damage versus vehicles, which is supposed to put them in the idea of them being the anti-vehicle war dog. But the problem is they're kind of just surpassed by their own book. They have Brigands and Karnivores, which are naturally ballistic skill 2 and weapon skill 2. This guy sits on ballistic skill 3 with only 2 shots on his melter. It's very easy for him to whiff. If I was going to be ringing a unit that could whiff just as easy, I'd probably be looking at Mephetic Blight Haulers for much cheaper. I don't really see them having too much of a purpose. The other war dogs I can definitely see uses for, but this guy himself, he's not really cutting it for me. And last but not least is the Knight Desecrator. The Desecrator is one of the more expensive Chaos Knights. It does have a good long-range anti-tank gun. 3 shots, d6 plus 3 damage or something. Very nice. Very good AP and strength as well. The problem is this guy has a rule that is completely about giving rerolls to war dogs. And as we said before, if you bring a large knight, you can't bring small knights. So you're basically paying 400 and plus points for a 3-shot gun. You can just bring, for less than that, you can bring 3 Predators, all with 3 las cannon shots each. It just doesn't really make the cut. There's no real use for him for us. He's definitely better in his own army where he can bring war dogs to support. But in Death Guard, to be getting the most out of that unit, he needs to be shooting and in melee. And he's not really going to do great in either because he's not got the tools he needs, which are the stratagems from their codex, to get to melee. And he also kind of just wants to make use of the gun, which means he doesn't want to walk forward because it might get him killed. He's a convoluted, confused mess of a unit that can't buff war dogs, which is the one thing he's supposed to do. So I don't think we'll ever be taking him. But first, before we go on to the actual allied units, very quickly, I forgot something last episode. The humble rhino, oh my god. Yeah, I'm sorry. I forgot the rhino somehow in the last episode, which is funny given the rhino is an amazing unit. So we'll quickly go over the rhino. So obviously the rhino, surprisingly, actually has more output than you think. As long as you're not shooting anything elite or ridiculous, he has up to 8 combi bolter shots with lethal hits, followed by a havoc launcher. And he can also has 2 firing points, which means 2 models inside the vehicle can fire outside of the vehicle. Basically, the vehicle picks the models and the vehicle acts as if it has their weapons, which is very powerful. Flamers can fire at the top, psychic attacks can fire at the top, plasma guns, all sorts of stuff. So, very versatile, very useful. Defensively, for its points, it is an extremely cheap hull with toughness 9, 10 wounds, 3 up save, access to smoke. It's not going to... it's not going to sit there and tank the worst anti-tank your opponent's got, but it's going to be fairly resistant to small arms fire, and it's going to keep your guys nice and safe from stuff like indirect. So it's very good in regards to that. Mobility-wise, it is the fastest unit we have access to. He moves 12 inches, he's a speedy boy, and the mobility he gives to your units, such as Plague Marines and Virions, is incredible. It makes them so much more usable, so much more able to basically get across the board, get into staging points. For those who don't know, a staging point is a point in the middle of the board, basically where your rhino will sit with the guys inside, and he controls the area around it, usually behind a wall. So he'll park in there. If your opponent wants to come anywhere near that rhino, they're at threat of them disembarking, moving, and then charging that unit or shooting that unit. I think this guy basically is actually fantastic. He can also activation lock your opponent. What this means is if you have a rhino on a point, on objective, with 10 guys inside, and your opponent deep strikes in a unit of 6 crisis suits and a commander with all the guns in the world, and they shoot the rhino, and they kill the rhino, and they deal 50 damage to it, the rhino has no chance, the rhino dies. However, the guys inside get out, but now there's nothing else to shoot them, because the Tau player has to declare all his shooting when he fires the unit. So the Plague Marines were on the table. He had to use it to pop the rhino. So now he is activation locked. He doesn't have enough activations to kill both the rhino and its contents. So putting your opponent in these positions where they have to expose more than one unit to pop a Rhino and its contents can be extremely powerful and something you can use to punish them for being aggressive. Overall, definitely bring Chaos Rhinos. I've seen people run them even with just characters, no Plague Marines, but if you're considering any Plague Marines, 100% buy a Rhino. It's not the fanciest unit. It's kind of a boring unit to buy and to think about, but when you start playing with Rhinos, you will realise how much you wish you had Rhinos earlier and how good Rhinos actually are. So yes, forgive me, blessed Rhino, we love you. So moving on to the actual units. So we're going to start with Rotigus. So I wish it was Cherry Aid. So Rotigus is a great Unclean One, the named great Unclean One. For this, he gets toughness 12, 22 wounds, and a 4-up invulnerable. Now, what's interesting about Rotigus is Rotigus's spell, he puts it on an enemy unit, and any Nurgle demon that attacks that unit gets to add 1 to the damage. Now, this is Chaos Demon Nurgle, so you can't benefit from your Plague Burst Crawlers because that would be insane to make it damage free or something like that. That would be funny, but it doesn't work. But what it does do is it does give Rotigus access to 7 attacks at damage 4 or something like 14 attacks or something daft at damage 2. Now this is incredibly powerful because he actually ends up hitting close, and if not better than Mortarion a lot of the time. Now Mortarion is not exactly the greatest example, but this guy is also only 240 points or something like that. And having access to a damage 2 sweep with something like 14 attacks or something is actually incredibly powerful because damage 1 sweeps is what we're limited to as Death Guard, which is quite unique. So this guy actually hits quite hard, and that's just his melee profile. He also has a ranged attack. He has 2 ranged attacks actually, and they're again not that bad. I mean, they're pretty decent. Not going to set the world on fire, but they're quite decent. Now, on top of this, he has another rule, which is he halves the movement and OC of enemy units in an aura around him. It's quite short range aura. However, this is quite interesting because we have ways to reduce OC by 1. However, Rotigus can flat out half it. And because of the way of Bodmass, which designer documentaries ruled it, you would halve first and then -1. Which is quite interesting because it means you can take OC4 units to OC1 without contagion, as they would halve to 2 and then -1 to 1. So he basically makes points near untakeable whilst he's alive, especially if you back him up with something like Plague Marines, because they're OC2 each, up to OC3 with the icon. And if the opponent even charges in with 20 Necron Warriors, if they have the Catacomb Command Badge that gives them +1, you can halve them to 1. The Catacomb Command Badge gives them +1, but then you -1 off Contagion. You can hold these Necron Warriors purely at 1 OC. And obviously this applies for vehicles as well. If a vehicle is nearby, usually they're OC4, you can knock it down to 2, minus it by 1 into 1. That's again, you basically made him need 4 times the amount of vehicles on a point if he wishes to out OC you, which as you can imagine is not going to be happening. You can't get 4 vehicles suddenly out of nowhere. Now this guy also has skew potential. He is toughness 12. He has 22 wounds and a 4-up invuln. Do you know what else is toughness 12 with a 4-up invuln and lots of wounds? Mortarion. And you can combine this with stuff like Land Raiders or just Demon Engine spam. Give them nightmarish units to kill. This guy can also deep strike, so he can rapid ingress. So if you have a turn where you decide to expose everything, you bring in Rotigus, you bring in Mortarion to the front, you bring in out your Demon Engines, you're going to give your opponent a target priority nightmare. And this guy, although he only has a 4-up invulnerable, the toughness 12 really does help versus the small arms fire. But 22 wounds is also more wounds than Mortarion, which is quite nice. And if you make the 4-up invulns on the weapons that matter, this guy can be an absolute nightmare to bring down. So he has potential in skew as well. I actually think Rotigus is quite an interesting unit, especially with how cheap he is now, and the fact he has that profile, that melee profile as well, a unique ability that can halve movement and OC, and his potential to fit into skew lists. I think Rotigus does have a place potentially in certain lists, especially skew our primary focus lists, because again, for his points, he actually can do quite a bit. He's not mega expensive. If he dies, it's not like you've lost Mortarion, you've lost a massive key centerpiece, but he is going to require a lot of firepower to bring down, and he does offer something unique to the army. So if you like Rotigus and you were considering him, I think there's much worse choices you could make. I give Rotigus the thumbs up. Generic Great Unclean One. So this guy, I think you should just take Rotigus. But that being said, he's not awful. So offensively, he's a bit worse than Rotigus, but mainly because he doesn't have that spell to give him +1 damage. But what he does have is he does have access to D6 damage melee, which is both a blessing and a curse. You can roll hot on D6 damage and kill something massive out of nowhere. You roll a 6, a 5, and a 5. You've just dealt 16 damage. That's, a dead Primarch. Or the opposite can happen, and you get 4 wounds through. The tank should be dead because it's going to average like 12 damage, and you roll 4 ones. It happens. It's not a good feeling. So that is both the gift and the curse of D6 damage melee. He does have a 6-up Feel No Pain aura for himself and for any other Nurgle Daemon, again faction locked though, nearby. Now this is okay. He has a few less wounds than Rotigus, but he does have a 6-up Feel No Pain. Feel No Pains can be quite spiky, however this is only a 6-up Feel No Pain, which means it's not obviously nowhere near as easy to spike as a 5-up Feel No Pain. However, it's quite a nice durability boost. Does make him roughly just a slightly bit tougher than Rotigus because he has a good amount of wounds, same toughness, same invulnerable, and a Feel No Pain on top of that. Which if you make a fair amount of them, then as we talked before, every Feel No Pain you make is then another save that could be Feel No Pain saved once again. So it's actually more than just getting +1 wound per 6. It's actually a little bit better than that. His unique thing, however, is he can pick an enemy unit and give them -1 toughness. Now this will stack with our Death Guard aura, which is quite impactful in certain scenarios. -1 toughness is good, but against stuff like tanks, generally doesn't tend to get them below any important bracket. However, -2 toughness starts to get into the point where you have a really good chance to bring units down brackets. So going from toughness 11 to toughness 9, or 10 to 8, 12 to 10, actually matters for a lot of weapons. You go like entropy cannons, for example, wounded on 5s on most things. If they're -2 toughness, and toughness 10 goes to toughness 8, you now wound on 3s. That's effectively +2 to wound. You have Blight Halls with strength 9 Melter, who can now be wounding up to toughness 11 on 3s, and anything that was below that on 2s. So you can see there's actually quite a lot of power in that ability. He has the same skew potential as well as Rotigus. The same, again, points before. Toughness 12, invulnerable, big guy, deep strike. So that's not too bad either. But I think the main appeal for this guy is probably the fact he might be harder to kill with a 6-up Feel No Pain, but mainly looking at double stacking -1 toughness. Now, I don't recommend this guy as much as Rotigus, but again, he's cheap in points. He's a big monster that's going to take some dedicated shooting to bring down. So I think, again, if you really like the model, you really want to run him, there's a lot worse you can do. And if you do manage to get that -1 toughness into some really important units, even dropping aggressors to T4 means your mortars now wound them on 2s. Dropping Marines to toughness 2 is funny because you just wound them on 2s with everything. And dropping Guardsmen to toughness 1 because you can is also hilarious. But yeah, he's not bad. This guy's an interesting one. I thought this guy would actually go in the trash bin with the ones at the start. But actually, he's not too bad because I didn't actually look at his stat line too much. This guy's toughness 10, with 10 wounds, a 3-up save, and a 4-up invulnerable. And he's actually not overly expensive. He's kind of cheap. Another thing he has is all of his attacks, although not high in quantity, are all flat 3 damage, which is actually quite unique given in Death Guard our flat 3 damage in combat is limited mainly to Lords of Contagion, Typhus, and Mortarion at damage 4. So that's actually a point going for him. Now, he's offensively, because of the damage 3, potentially quite scary. Defensively, he's toughness 10, which is really high. For what he looks like anyway, people wouldn't... I found out he was toughness 10, I didn't believe it. I went and looked and I was like, oh, okay. 10 wounds is a good amount. and a 3-up and a 4-up invulnerable is really nice. 4-up invulnerables can be very, very spiky, and a 3-up save there just to go on anything that's AP 0 or AP 1 in cover is really nice. It's just going to help you survive that lower AP damage. Now, the one slight downside about this guy is his rules basically require him to be leading a unit, which basically forces him to bring Beasts of Nurgle, because that's what he leads. Now, his rule gives them a free heroic intervention once per game, which is actually not bad, given that stratagem is expensive. So being able to do that and get Beasts of Nurgle and himself with those damage-free weapons involved in a fight is not too bad. And the potential for him to be in a unit of Beasts of Nurgle and be like a little beast brick running around, that's quite a tough brick to bring down. We'll go into beasts after, but you'll see it can actually make quite a nasty little brick. However, for me personally, sorry, 1 second. He's just slightly too expensive. And if he was just a bit cheaper, I'd actually consider just running him alone. Solo, deep striking in. His base is a little large, but it's not horrendous. And people aren't going to remember to deny the snail. It's going to escape a lot of people's minds. But if this guy manages to get something like a cheeky rapid ingress or a deep strike into a backline, trying to get rid of him is going to be really tough at his profile, because he's almost like a tank. He's almost like a tank with a 4-up invulnerable, despite just being a snaily boy. So if you actually manage to sneak him in and he just gets to walk around, do some actions, maybe get a charge off here or there, they're actually going to bring some real anti-tank weaponry to bring this guy down, which I just find really funny. It's like there's a snail. It's like, what's the threat, sir? There's a snail in our backlines. Okay, shoot it. Sir, I can't. I need a last cannon. I don't know, it just humours me. But if he was just a bit cheaper, I'd be happy. But he's not horrible. And again, I think he deserves to be worth mentioning over the bin list, what we had before, because of the fact of his profile alone, and his cost is fairly cheap, and the flat 3 damage combined means he doesn't hit like a noodle. So this guy running solo, I actually think, again, worse things you could take, much worse things. So Mr. Snail Boy, I actually think you can have a use, oddly. So the Chaos Demon Demon Prince. So this is their footprints. Now, I give him 59% in offensive, because apparently, and 51. I put 1% in his mobility from his offensive. It looks like that's gonna irk me. This guy is basically akin to our Demon Prince, but we already talked about the issues with our Demon Prince. Now this guy is a bit more of a selfish one. He doesn't have a feel no pain aura, but what this guy can do is he does have an aura of stealth for faction locked demons, which is cool. It means he's going to be -1 to be hit at range permanently, which is actually decent. And he has access to once per game, giving himself a 3+ invulnerable for a phase, which is incredibly powerful, as long as it's timed right. The problem this guy has is he's still limited by the same problems as our Demon Prince, our walking one, in which he is a non-lone up character who's got okay toughness. He's 2-up save, 4-up invulnerable, still toughness 11, which is quite good, don't get me wrong. But the problem is that trying to get him into position to do things like charges is going to be tough. He's a monster. He has to walk around buildings. He has to, try and get into certain areas that are going to be blocked by walls and ruins, and people can move block him. So he's a purely melee beat stick that wants to get into a fight, but can be move blocked, controlled, and just denied charges so easily, which really hampers his use. Now, what he is actually useful for, though, is a giant shoot me stick. People are going to want to shoot this guy when he exposes himself, and he can pop that once per game, 3+ invulnerable, plus he has stealth, which actually makes him potentially skew really hard on those 3-up invulnerables, and your opponent could waste a lot of shooting trying to kill this guy, which is obviously great for the rest of your army. But that's his biggest use, it's to get shot. It's not to actually get in there and start beating people up. His melee is mediocre at best. It's strength 8 or 9. It's not good. AP 2, damage 3, which sounds good. The problem is, this guy you want to be envisioning punching vehicles or, tough units to death. And he just doesn't tend to do it. I had one of these, a World Eaters one, charge into my Terminator Sorcerer Lord. and I just made 4-ups. Invulnerables, got a bit lucky admittedly, but that was like a 200 point unit that failed to kill a 70 point character, and it can happen. So personally, I'm not a huge fan of this guy, but I think there are, again, worse options, and if you use him like a big distraction Carnifex, that's not the worst thing in the world. You basically walk out, you say, hey, shoot me and kill me, or I'm going to charge you next turn, and your opponent goes, okay, I will shoot you. You go once per game, 3+ invulnerable, and you just buy as much time as you can. I'd even consider using a CP reroll on one of those saves, just to absorb as much shooting as humanly possible. Now the Winged Demon Prince. Now this one is a little more interesting, and I've just noticed I have completely forgot to change the points on this guy. That is clearly a Hellbrute. His ratings have changed. I must have just forgot to update the bullet points. So I'm a very good content creator. I am an idiot. Apologies. So what this should be saying is this guy actually gets a choice of 3 special rules when he charges into combat. I might even just be in the fight phase. I don't think he has to charge. But basically, he can pick between sustained hits 1, lethal hits, or devastating wounds. Now that's interesting. We don't really have access to devastating wounds. Devastating wounds mean your opponent can't take a save against it of any kind. So no invulnerable and no saving throw. So if you roll a 6 to wound, you're just going to go straight through the damage, which is damage free for this guy. Now, the only issue with that is he only has 6 attacks, which on average, if you hit them all, should give you 1 dev wound, which isn't too bad. But another interesting thing this fella has is once per game, he has the ability to add 3 to his attacks characteristic. Now this is quite interesting because now you have 9 attacks and you have a chance to spike 2. You got a decent chance to get 2 6s, but you also have quite a good chance potentially to spike 3. And 9 damage dev wounds will put a hole in anything. So this guy actually is quite interesting. I think more so than the Walking Demon Prince. He has the extra movement speed, plus fly can still come in useful, means you can't be move blocked as easy or screened out. But the fact that this guy actually can get to a semi-threatening amount of attacks and then put rules on top of it, such as dev wounds, lethal hits, sustained hits, actually makes this guy a better Smash character. For those who don't know, Smash characters are units that we bring with the sole intent of basically going in and smashing something. They're not there to give utility or support. He's just there to go in and go punch something in the face. So this guy could rapid ingress in behind a wall safely, use his superior movement because of the wings, giving him extra movement to get round and set up a charge, get into something juicy, pop you once per game, 3 attacks, pick something like dev wounds, and basically try and get your value back in that one turn, and then anything else from there, basically just absorbing bullets. So it's quite an interesting one. I think Rocky from Rocky's Gaming Lounge told me about this guy. I was actually surprised by him. I think they might be used. He's still expensive, and that's really the problem with Demon Princes at the moment. They're just really expensive for when you could get so much else for cheaper. But I actually think it's a really interesting model, and because of the new amazing Demon Prince kit, if you were after a reason to get one, I think this is probably the best place to use it. This or the Walking Death Guard version, I think, are the best Demon Princes. But yeah, he's a cool unit. He's dead unique. Nurglings. Oh my god, Nurglings. So, if you don't know what a Nurgling is, you've probably either been under a rock or you're pretty new to the game. Nurglings, when you look at them, are abysmal. Defensively, they're dog shit. They got 6 up invulnerable. Sorry for the language there. Offensively, they hit on like 5s. They got lethal hits, but it's like strength 2 or some at AP 0, 1 damage. It's awful. But that's not why you bring Nurglings. Nurglings fall into that bullet point before of bringing something unique and also bringing something for the mission. 35 points for 3 bases of Nurglings that have both Infiltrate and Deep Strike make these guys secondary scoring kings. These guys will quite often be doing your teleport homers if you're playing fixed. They can also Deep Strike in, behind enemy lines, engage in all fronts. Again, teleport homers, investigate signals. There is tons of uses for these guys. You never feel bad bringing units of Nurglings. They're a small footprint that your opponent really doesn't want to commit to screening out because it's such a low output impact unit. but the fact they have to potentially use units just to screen this out is also a win. And then that's on top of the other rule these guys have, which is a -1 to hit aura for close combat against anything that's not a vehicle or a monster. This is so cheeky, especially with our army rule, so we get the synergy between them, which is -1 weapon skill and -1 ballistic skill. So if you have a unit of Nurglings, so let's say, I don't know if you can see this, hopefully you can see this, so we have, let me get these models, we have our Lord of Contagion, and we have this Hearthkin thing. Say this is something really scary in melee, and he wants to charge your Lord of Contagion. He charges in with the current weapon skill -1 and ballistic skill. Contagion, this guy is going from hitting on 3s to hitting on 4s. However, if you had a unit of Nurglings behind, so on the other side of this Lord of Contagion here, but within 6 of him, as he charges in, so he charges in, he's now within 6 inches of the aura, he's now going to be -2 to hit, because -1 weapon skill does stack with -1 to be hit in close combat, which the Nurglings are providing. So this guy has gone from hitting on 3s to 5s, which is an insane damage output loss. Now imagine that versus weapon skill 4 units who go to 6s to hit. It's incredibly powerful. And the fun thing is, you can even do it when your opponent doesn't expect it. Because of how the movement phase is timed, you could see that fella coming for that charge, that Lord of Contagion. You could go, and if you have one of these little buggers in Deep Strike and you're worried about that charge, you can rapid ingress him in behind the Lord of Contagion. So now your opponent sits there and goes, oh no, if I make this charge now, I'm -2 to hit. But if I don't make the charge, I'm stood in the open with my pants down. So you can then basically put them in a shit sandwich situation where they either take the charge and get punished, or they don't take the charge and then get killed in their own turn. Very cheeky, and again, something that Nurglings offer to the army. Unique, powerful, and worst case scenario, they're not playing melee army, you can just focus on using them purely for secondaries. Again, 35 points for 3 Nurglings. You should bring minimum 2 units of these guys in every competitive Death Guard list, in my opinion. They are that good. You can even go for the 3rd unit, but I'd recommend 2. But if you can only get 1, run 1. There's a reason these guys are kind of sold out at the moment for a lot of people. Fantastic. Amazing. Beasts of Nurgle. Beasts of Nurgle are interesting. Beasts of Nurgle I tend to compare to Chaos Spawn. So offensively, they're quite strange. They don't hit mega hard, but they do have dev wounds on their claws at 2 damage each, which means a spiky roll can actually end up them doing a lot more damage than they had any right to. Defensively, they're toughness 9, 7 wounds, which is a little low on the wounds, but high on the toughness, with a 5 up invulnerable. Now, what's interesting though, is at the end of every phase, so not turn, phase, so shooting, movement, charge, fight, these guys, if they're not dead, heal to full, which is very interesting. It basically makes them immune to stuff like tank shock, because tank shock can do 6 maximum to them, and then because they're on 1 wound at the end of the charge phase, it heals to full, which is quite funny. So there's a unique thing there for them, probably the only unit in the game that is literally immune to tank shock. And they can be taken solo, which is again quite unique. Like spawn for us have to be taken in 2s. These guys can be taken as a unit of 1. What this means is, because they have deep strike innately, all demons have deep strike, just be aware. This means they can be used as secondary scoring pieces. Maybe not as efficient as Nurglings, but it's a single base, albeit larger compared to 3. And this guy also has OC, which Nurglings don't, which means this guy could happily teleport onto an open objective in the middle of the board and just stand there. And basically, your opponent has to come out with something that can 1 turn kill this unit, basically, 1 phase kill. You can't, chip this guy down, which also makes him pretty good for doing stuff like holding home versus indirect, because if the indirect shoots, drops him to 1 wound, and they're like, any other unit, they'd normally be like, okay, next turn we'll pick it up. Instead, this guy heals to full, which is a pain in the ass for a lot of units. So he's quite interesting. He's a little expensive for my liking, but he's definitely unique in the fact that he can hold a point. His base is big enough that any 3-inch deep strike can't come on the point. And again, any unit that wants to come down, so let's say maybe Inceptors drop in, they shoot him, his toughness 9 saves him versus those bolters and those plasma, but let's say they take the they get 3 plasma wounds onto him and he fails all his invulns. He goes down to 1 wound. Normally, what would happen is they will then go for like a charge or something and try and finish him off and take the point. But this guy's going to heal to full. So he's now going to be back up to the full 7 wounds, which means charging him to finish off that last wound is impossible. So this guy's actually pretty good at solo holding points, which is another point for him. Overall, I think beasts need a bit more experimentation with. I think they're quite an interesting unit. That's a bit of a hodgepodge of spawn and Nurgling in a way. The toughness 9 is just really interesting to play around with. And I think they might even be played for larger units of them. We mentioned before, like a Beast Bomb with Horticulous Slimux. That could be quite interesting. But it's quite a tough unit. I wish it was just a little bit cheaper. But interesting. Plague Drones. So Plague Drones were very close to going in the bin tier. The only thing that really saved them was the fact that they are a fast-moving unit that is toughness 8 with 5 wounds. Their output is abysmal. They have like AP1, damage 1, or like AP2, AP1, damage 2. It's not very good. Weapon skill 4 on some of it. It's not great. They're not really going to be killing much. Their main thing is if they hit someone with their grenade attack, well, shooting attack, sorry, other Nurgle demons, faction locked again, get to reroll wounds against that target, which is actually an incredibly powerful ability. The problem is, they themselves can't benefit from it. So they have to basically activate it, and then another Nurgle demon unit has to then attack to make use of it. This means that bringing Plague Drones alone has no benefit, apart their actual profile and movement. They have no rule. You would have to bring something alongside them to benefit them, which I think makes them pretty not great, to be honest, because of that investment. Because the one thing that these guys do have going for them is the movement 10, which is quite nice, toughness 8 and 5 wounds. They're actually quite tough. But again, the problem is, if we're looking at fast-moving tough units, we need to compare them to something like a Bloat Drone. And Bloat Drone are 100 points at the moment. They spread contagions, they do plenty of things, they can't be locked down, as we've covered, really good output weaponry for the points. So you just look at Plague Drones and think, why Plague Drone? Because I struggle to see a reason to bring Plague Drones in a world where Bloat Drones exist. But again, as long as you look at them as being, they're OC2, which is quite interesting. So maybe there's a say for them to just fly up, use OC6 to bully off anything that's like a 5-man unit of OC1 off a point. But overall, I think there's better places to look to spend your points. Soul Grinder. How cool is that model, by the way? Quick heads up, all the pictures you are seeing are provided by both the Chaos Demons Facebook group and the Chaos Knights and Imperial Knights competitive groups, because they do share a lot of them together. So thank you very much to all those people that provided me with those pictures. They look awesome. I hope people who are watching enjoy looking at all the pictures of the models as much as I did when I got sent them. So thank you guys. The Soul Grinder. The Soul Grinder, again, is kind of interesting. His direct comparison would obviously be the Defiler. They have kind of the same rule set. They have the same ability, and they have same sort of profile defensively. Now, one thing the Soul Grinder has going for it is it actually rocks a 4-up invulnerable, and a Nurgle Soul Grinder gets the toughness 11, which is quite nice. 11, 14 wounds, 3-up armor, and a 4-up invulnerable. 4-up invulnerables making it very spikeable on anti-tank weaponry. It's quite easy to roll 2 4-ups against a Lancer compared to needing 5-ups. An interesting thing this guy also brings is more indirect fire. The Nurgle Soul Grinders get access to an indirect attack. Now do bear in mind this will not benefit from things such as Boil Blight or Lord of Virulence or Mortarion. So these guys will be hitting on reduced accuracy out of line of sight, which makes it a lot less powerful than something like the Plague Burst Crawler Morty combo. However, it's extra indirect, and if you really wanted to skew into maximum indirect, they do have indirect attacks. These guys also, however, come rocking an extremely powerful melee profile, which gives them innately incredibly strong tank shock, which is quite nice. A lot of Death Guard vehicles themselves outside of the Hellbrute are not very good at tank shocking. Even the Fleshmaw drone is only strength 7, so you're only going to get 7 to 9 dice max, which isn't great. This guy quite reliably gets, I think, 16 dice. So again, as you can imagine, that's extremely powerful. A lot more chance to guarantee those 6 mortal wounds on the charge, which is very nice. His rule, however, and this is the biggest problem with both Soul Grinds and Defilers, his rule is completely subjective to where you play. On UKTC terrain, which is what I play on the most, they have ruled that no ruin is shorter than 4 inches. What that effectively means is Soul Grinders and Defilers do not have rules in where I play. The Soul Grinder and the Defiler share the same rule, which is if a terrain piece is 4 inches or lower, it can move through them as if they're not there, which is amazing. Like, it's such a good rule when you get to use it. But unfortunately, on my terrain setups, I can't use them because they have no rule and it's very hard to maneuver them. And another thing that really hurts the Soul Grinder, more so than the Defiler, is recently they've started selling the Soul Grinder with a base. And the base is huge. Will actually told me about this in the previous recording. It's massive. And it basically means the unit is near impossible to maneuver if you can't make use of that moving over terrain. And because I can't make use of it in my meta, that's obviously going to affect what I think about the unit. And I think it really hampers how useful the unit will be overall. So unfortunately, that really does hinder how good I think the Soul Grinder can be, because its profile actually looks really good. Again, the melee profile is solid. It's really got a spikeable invulnerable save. It's nice and tough. I just wish UKTC and the ruling body for it let us actually make use of these rules. But unfortunately, as it is, the Soul Grinder struggles to find a place for me. But if you play somewhere that plays player place terrain, or with runes that are under 4 inches, this guy might actually be quite an impactful addition to your army, especially if you're playing like a skew list with those high toughness models. So yeah, he's not the worst, he's not the best. I think he has uses. I think he can become extremely powerful, maybe in player place terrain settings. But if you're a UKTC like me, unfortunately this guy is never likely going to leave your deployment zone. So, bit sad, but how cool is that model? Into Chaos Knights. So Chaos Knights are interesting. So before we go into it, obviously all Chaos Knights have a vehicle stat line. So minimum toughness 10 upwards. This guy, for example, is toughness 13. So that naturally makes them all strong in a skew list. So I'm not going to say that for every single entry. Just understand vehicle skew. Knights obviously naturally go into that. So the Knight Tyrant, he comes in 2 different variants. Basically, you have a long range anti-tank / elite or a close range anti-tank / elite. Now, the unique rule for the Knight Tyrant is your opponent cannot set up any units within 12 inches of the Knight Tyrant. This was incredible, and it still is. That's an incredible rule. Chaos has no other access to this rule outside of the Knight Tyrant. So this rule basically says, screw you Gene Stealers, screw you Inceptors, screw you anything that wants to come within 3, or anything that wants to come even remotely close, you are not doing it. It is a walking Primaris Infiltrator, which is incredibly unique, incredibly powerful, basically can hold down your entire deployment on his own from Deep Strikers. So, definitely unique, good ability. Toughness 13 with a 2-up save and a 5-up invulnerable. That's tough to kill. Like, toughness 13 is nuts. It's higher than Morty. He's got a 2-up armor save. He's going to be getting cover all the time because of how big he is. So he's basically rocking a 1-up at that point. He's not easy to bring down. His biggest weakness is obviously in close combat. He doesn't get the invulnerable. But because of AP at the moment being generically kind of low in melee outside of key units, there's often a chance that he'll be getting a 4-up or 5-up save in melee either way. So his loadouts, one of them is actually quite, well, the 2 very different ones. The long range anti-tank is something Death Guard struggle with, and he definitely kills pretty much whatever he sees. The power of those guns is insane. The problem is really the towering nerf, and that's going to apply to his other loadout as well. So for those who don't know, towering used to be able to basically see over terrain. It was a bit stupid, I won't lie. So what it meant was the Knight Tyrant could sit at the back of your deployment and basically shoot most things he wanted to, providing they were he could see through normally their second floor. But for a lot of vehicles and stuff, that was very possible because the Knight Tyrant's a very tall model. However, now that doesn't work, so he's back to needing actual line of sights and obscuring working the same. Now he can stand on terrain and see through it, regardless of whether he's wholly within it, which is nice, but the problem is he only ignores it for the terrain he stood on. This means that the Knight Tyrant has to obey firing lanes, and he's gonna really struggle to get the firing lanes where he needs them, and people can just play around him. And playing around a big model like this means that, because this model is like something like 600 points, ridiculous. It's so expensive. And if he's not getting value back, you're just going to fall behind in the value game. So as long as they keep dodging the firing lanes this guy can get, he's never going to shoot, which means he's never going to be able to have impact. The alternate build was the flamethrower and the harpoon, which is in more close close quarters. Yeah. I want to say fixated Knight. It's meant for close quarters. It used to be really good because combined with the no setup within 12, combined with the fact that it has a 3d6 strength 6 AP2 2 damage flamer and that crazy harpoon which can just one shot insta kill vehicles and monsters, he was incredibly dominating piece of the battlefield, and his area control was insane. What made his area control even more insane was Overwatch. Nobody wanted to run past the Knight that had 4 melter guns, a harpoon, all the guns on top of the 3d6 auto hitting strength 6 AP2 2 damage flamer. It meant wherever this guy went, he dominated the space. However, with the recent towering nerf, towering units can no longer Overwatch, which meant the biggest strength of the Tyrant with the flamer and the harpoon was just gutted from him, and he didn't get a points drop to compensate. So unfortunately, that's left the Tyrant in this weird place where I think he's not a bad model with a great unique rule, but at the moment the nerfs have just been so unkind to it, and his points haven't come down, that he's just not usable. Like, he can't get his value back. He can't get the firing lanes he needs to be the unit that sits at the back and shoots, and he can't dominate area as well as he used to with the flamer and the harpoon. And it's so sad because Sam Boardman, who recently went 4-1 and took best Death Guard at LGT, who we had on the podcast, was running 2 of these guys in his Chaos Knight army and decimating people. It was funny. And since that nerf, he's basically had to put them away because they're not really viable, which is super sad to see. Sorry, Sam. The Knight Despoiler. So again, this guy comes with all the caveats of towering, toughness 12, skew. However, this guy's biggest strength is that he has a customizable loadout. You can take any combination of guns or even dual wield the same weapon on this Knight. This means you can basically tailor him to whatever your list needs. That's his biggest strength. Part of that, he doesn't have much going for him. He has 1 free reroll and a hit, wound or damage, I think it is. It's not that interesting. But the ability to bring something like double thermal cannon is something the Loyalists can't do, and it also gives you an incredibly powerful ability to tailor this Knight to what your list needs. If you're worried about horde lists, you can bring double Gatling. If you're worried about vehicle lists, you can bring double thermal cannons. Obviously, as you can imagine, this has drawbacks as well because he's not going to be as good against other units. His melee is going to be quite rubbish if you do that, because he's not going to have a proper melee weapon. But it is something you can do. That's kind of all this guy's got going for him. The fact that you can double up on weapons. So if you really, 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 really want a Knight that can very specifically do one thing, Despoiler, there's a lot of ways you can do that in Despoiler. The Abominant. Okay, so I like the Abominant. And I don't think it's very good, but I like it. So this guy has a 9-shot weapon with 3 damage on it, but no AP. But he does have dev wounds. Now what's interesting is this will work with our Contagion for -1 save, because you're effectively giving the gun an AP, which is the most important. AP is AP1. So that's quite nice. And they won't be able to get cover against it if they're a 3-up save, because it's an AP0 weapon. So again, quite nice. The other thing this guy can do is force battle shock tests, which is useful in certain matchups and scenarios. It's more of a cute ability, but it can come into play, especially if you get creative with uses. Another thing this guy has going for him, he tends to have lower AP than the other Knights, but higher volume. Even his melee weapon has more attacks, and he has a tail with extra attacks on it. But the problem is they're only AP2 and AP1, whereas other knights are like AP4 and AP3. Again, this is less of a problem if you're rocking the -1 save contagion, because that's making up for all those AP reductions, whilst also maintaining the benefit of quantity of attacks. So I think the Electro Scourge on this guy is actually incredibly scary. So that's good. Another fun thing that I want to do, and Will might do it to me if we get the 3k subs goal and I go to an RTT with a list the YouTube members have made for me, is this guy pulses mortal wounds, which is funny because it means if you follow him round with a Chaos Lord who also pumps out mortal wounds in AoE, boom, Abominant. The Abominant combo is real. I will die on this hill. We will make everyone melt around us with our pulsing AoE mortal wounds. Bless you, Abominant. So overall though, I don't think this guy is as bad as people think. The Volkite Combustor, the 9-shot gun with the dev wounds, is actually quite interesting when you give it -1 to saves. And the same with the melee. The melee actually becomes one of these more scarier knights outside of the Rampager, because you just get so many attacks. You make up for the lack of AP with the contagion, and they're still all like damage 2 and damage 3, so it's quite a nice profile. And he still obviously gets to do decent tank shock. So I like the Abominant. I think there's much worse things you can take. Okay, Rampager. Do you want to run at someone? Welcome to the Rampager. The Rampager is the fastest knight with 12-inch move, the fastest large knight. He also basically guarantees 6 mortal wounds on tank shock. It doesn't actually say that, but you're going to roll something like 24 dice. It's staffed, it's funny. So you're basically going to get 6 mortals. He has a once per game ability to advance and charge, which is incredibly strong on a unit like this, which is pure melee. This is the pure melee knight, just remember that. And because of this, it makes him an extremely good pressure piece. So if you want to make a list that's going to run at your opponent and just hold them in their deployment while they're trying to deal with you, it's going to make them crumble under pressure, then the Rampager is actually quite a decent shout. He's also the cheapest of the large knights, so he's got that going for him. The problem is, with the Rampager is made so much better in Chaos Knights because they have the stratagem that lets him move through walls and units. And without that, he's just no way near as fast. The once per game advance and charge is nice, but again, you could just fail it. You could fail it. You still got to get around buildings. You still got to get within range to make charges. And he's a big model, and he's going to be struggle to move with that big base, and he's going to be getting shot the entire way. You will take this unit, and it will draw fire. And that's a good thing and a bad thing. It's good because he's getting shot, so your other stuff isn't. But if you brought a Rampager because you want to see a Rampager do rampaging things and pulling vehicles apart and killing loads of stuff in melee, I'll advise against it, because this guy will never really make it to combat most games because of the fact that he's going to get shot first. If you put him and Mortari in front of someone, I guarantee they're probably going to shoot the Rampager. And that's good, but odds are you will lose the Rampager. It's a very cool model. It's a very awesome unit in theory, but it's a model that if you bought because you want to see it do its job, it'll actually very rarely do its job as an ally, because its job is to not get into melee. Its job is to eat bullets. And unfortunately, a lot of the times I've seen people bring Rampagers, get dead excited about wanting to use the unit, and then realistically it just dies turn 1 or turn 2, which sucks, and I'm sorry to say, but I just want to be honest with you guys and keep that up front. Now, the one thing though, that if you do want to play Rampager, do play it in Chaos Knights. You do get the stratagem that actually makes it very usable, which lets it hide behind obscuring, then obviously it can move through the wall, so you don't have to worry about going round, so you can keep your speed and be safe. But if you are bringing the Rampager in an army of Death Guard, I would probably recommend Karnivores first, if that's what you want to do. But I would consider him in a pressure army where you want to take stuff like Rhinos, Bloat Drones, Morty, and basically just rush at your opponent, as much pressure at once, and trying to get them on the back foot off the get-go, basically. So, yeah, Rampager. Not too bad, just set realistic expectations when you use this guy. So, War Dogs. The Brigand is... incredibly good. Anyone that plays Chaos at the moment probably knows how good Brigands are. So they're a full shooty mini knight. So the mini knights are all toughness 10, 12 or 14 wounds. I think it's 12. 3 up armor save, 5 up invulnerable with a 10-inch move, or a 12-inch move, 14 for the carnivores. And these guys are rocking double guns. Now, what these guys get, though, is Ballistic Skill 2 naturally, which is incredible. Any unit that is Ballistic Skill 2 or Weapon Skill 2 naturally is good because it becomes super self-efficient. You don't have to worry too much about spiking low on your freeze to hit. Normally when you have freeze to hit, you'll still want to look for some rerolls. But when you have Ballistic Skill 2 or Weapon Skill 2, rerolls are obviously nice if you can get them, but they're nowhere near as important and as needed to be efficient. His actual rule is he gets extra AP versus the closest target, as we mentioned before. This is incredibly powerful and synergistic with our -1 save contagion, because it means you can get the Gatling gun up to AP 3, the Havoc launcher up to AP 2, and the Thermal Spear, the Demon Breath Spear, sorry, up to AP 6, which means a Land Raider in cover still doesn't get a save, which I think is comedy gold. I think it's just funny to see your opponent's reaction when you tell them it's AP 6, so that's good. The one downside to the Brigand is 24-inch range. However, this is okay. In most armies where the Brigand has to expose itself to go forward to get range, that's a negative. However, we have access to Plague Burst Crawlers, and what Plague Burst Crawlers are fantastic at doing is making your opponent have to make a move. They have to do something, or they'll get mortared all game. This means, often, if your army's here, and your opponent's here, they will start pushing you. And as they push you, these Brigands can hide nice and safe, and then as the opponent comes closer to try and pressure you and shut down those Plague Burst Crawlers, the Brigands can expose themselves to fire at the incoming enemy. This basically negates their need to expose themselves to get in range, because the opponent's going to come to them, which means their 24-inch range is much less of a problem. So overall, Brigands are a fantastic firing support piece. They're quite unique. We don't really have anything that has this much ranged output at such good ballistic skill naturally. The Gatling gun is great into, infantry models. The thermal spear's there for picking up vehicles, and they also have the indirect Havoc launcher on the top of the head, which is great. It's only weak. Don't get me wrong. It's strength 5, AP 0, 1 damage, but if you manage to combine the closest target with -1 save, it still hits at ballistic skill 3 because they don't ignore indirect. At -1 AP again, and that can pick up stuff like Cultist, Guardsmen. Again, it's just another tool to add to this ridiculous indirect that we can already bring. So Brigands are probably the easiest sell ever. If you can get some Brigands and you like the model and you want to use them, they're never going to be bad. I always think Brigands are going to find a use in your army. Karnivore. So the Karnivore's a bit more of an interesting one. It's melee only, but it is 14-inch move, and it has weapon skill 2, so same as the Brigand, but weapon skill this time, which gives it more powerful melee than Mortarion, which is quite funny. This guy genuinely hits harder than Mortarion 9 times out of 10. Now, there's not too much to talk about the Karnivore. It gets to reroll charges. There's 2 main uses that me and Will have talked about for it. One is, again, we're talking about the pressure skew. We saw recently a list go 5-0, basically using bloat drones and triple Karnivore and Mortarion to just pressure their opponent in the early game and basically make their opponent make mistakes and keep them busy and occupied. Remember, all these War Dogs are OC 8, which means it's very easy for them to take objectives off the opponent. So these guys don't even have to charge particularly. They can just use their massive movement and advance to just toe onto a point, deny the opponent primary for a turn. That can be a 10-point swing. Do that 2 more turns, 30-point swing. You can see the uses. The other great use for a Karnivore is as what Will would describe as a linebacker. So linebacker, I think, is an American football term or rugby. I don't know. I don't do the whole sports ball. Other people do. Will does more than me. But basically, this guy sits safely, sort of in your lines, and he works more as a reactive piece. So as your opponent pressures you, and this is more of a job for a one-off Karnivore, pressuring is obviously a job for more like a 3-off Karnivores, but be able to sit back And as your opponent sends something in, like a Land Raider or something, he basically reacts to the threat, runs to that side, supports the units that are there, charges in, kills the Land Raider. Basically, he's there to say, if you come to me, I'm here ready to respond. And that's his role. That's a very powerful role for a unit like this, because it does stop people getting super aggressive with units such as like Land Raiders, or even their own Carnivores or Big Knights. And because you have him sat there going, I have really good melee at weapon skill 2, and if you come near me, or near my guys on my points, I will react to that and I will charge you. So that's a very good use for the Carnivore. Overall, I actually really rate Carnivores. I need to play with some myself more, to be honest, but I think both the pressure list and having the one reactionary piece is also great. Also, if you ever get stuck of how to use it, throwing him in strat reserves is quite funny, because your opponent will panic for 3 turns about where he's going to come in. And when he does come in, he's still going to have a rerollable charge for free, thanks to his own ability. It's just fun mind games to play on your opponent to make them sweat. But yeah, Carnivore, overall, good choice. Executioner. So the Executioner is an interesting one. It's weird. It doesn't know what it wants to be, and it's kind of maybe should be in the trash pile, but I'll give it one saving grace. 48-inch range autocannons is very good. They are something like 4 shots each, so he has 8 shots. He does hit on 3s, not 2s, sadly. But they are flat 3 damage, which is very nice. The problem with this unit is it has AP 1 on its autocannons, which is usually kind of rubbish. But we can solve that with our ability to give them an extra save via the Contagion. The other issue this guy has is it kind of has a generalist profile. It's confused. It has strength 9, which implies it wants to kill light vehicles, but that's very specific, so it's not got the high enough strength to kill vehicles, but it doesn't have too low strength to just be used for infantry. It's a weird one. AP 1 says it doesn't want to shoot into elites and doesn't want to shoot into heavy armor targets, but damage 3 says the opposite. It says I want to shoot into stuff like Terminators, so it's confused on its profile. Now making it AP 2 is a lot more efficient, a lot better, and quite nice, but overall it's just a little confused on its weaponry. Now, one thing it can do is it can sit at the back of your board and basically fire away all game. It can just sit back and keep firing and keep firing and keep firing. So that's quite nice. Being able to do that basically means like this guy can usually stay out of threat range of most things and just keep firing away. He still has OC 8, which is obviously important for holding objectives. You can still go and deny an objective at worst case. But I just think the problem that this fella has, and again, he's not awful, I think you could find a use for him, is we have Predators with autocannons. Not as many shots, admittedly, but at the same time, ours can benefit from all the extra things we can give it. Extra AP from the stratagem, still gets the contagion effects. We give it -1 to be hit. We can give it las cannon sponsons to give it more of an anti-tank capacity. And comparatively, the Predator's a lot cheaper. It's not a lot cheaper, it's a decent amount cheaper though. And the Execution just struggles to find a role. It is still fast though, 12-inch move again, so it's easier for it to get angles. I think it's a bit easier to move because of its base as well than a Predator, which can be quite awkward having to like rotate and whatnot. But overall, there's a reason you don't see many of these guys. They're not the best. But again, if you want to make it work, you're basically looking at taking -1 save contagion and using that range to basically punish your opponent down those long firing lanes. And then the Stalker. So one thing to know about the Stalker is a character, which means he will give up stuff like Assassinate. Normally he's a character because it means he can take enhancements, but given he's an ally, he won't have enhancements. So this kind of just becomes a negative, except that one weird mission where you get extra points if a character's on an objective. But yeah, it means he's going to give up Assassination. Now, one interesting thing is he probably has the most versatile loadouts. He can swap between Chain Cannon and Thermal Spear, Cleaver or Claw. And he kind of wants to be a jack of all trades. He wants to have some shooting and some melee. The problem is he's Ballistic Skill and Weapon Skill 3 in both, so he's not going to be particularly great at either of them. And it's kind of one of those, it's the old saying, jack of all trades, master of none. Why are you bringing a Stalker? Because chances are, when you're bringing an ally, we're bringing it for a role, a specific role. Now, if you wanted a pressure piece or a linebacker kind of unit, the Karnivore does it. If you wanted melee, Karnivore does it. If you wanted ranged output, the Brigand does it better. If you wanted anti-tank, the Brigand, again, probably still does it better because Ballistic Skill 2 with that thermal spear is really nice. The Karnivore also just melees vehicles to death better. So it's kind of like, what does this guy do? Now, his unique rule is good for a bully unit. Basically, he gets bonuses if he is attacking a unit that is on its own. So if the enemy unit has no supporting units nearby, he gets some bonuses. But again, this isn't really the model that you want to be sending to get those units. If the opponent's dropped in, 5 infiltrators in your backlines and you want to go pick them up, you don't really want to be spending an entire war dog to go and do that, especially since he's not even guaranteed to do it. That's the kind of thing that we could just mortar off. So he's a bit confused. I think he's probably one of the worst war dogs because he just doesn't have that direct idea of what he actually wants to do and what he wants to be. And I think 9 times out of 10, you're just going to be better taking off either the Brigand or the Karnivore for better. Because you're going to have a role for him that you want him to fill, and I believe one of those two will just be better at filling that role. So that's all the allies we're going to be covering. Again, not Forge World or anything like that. But to summarise, allies give us the tools, extra tools to help us win. They're more of, a toolbox in a toolbox. So you want to bring them if they're going to help your game plan to win the game. Again, rule of cool does count, but the idea is that they can cover up gaps in our index, as we saw before. Like Nurglings are a perfect example of a very fast, disposable secondary scoring unit. Sorry, not fast. They're maneuverable in sense of like deep strike and whatnot. Infiltrate as well, something we don't have, so it's great for that. Brigands are great for covering up that really hard hitting ranged output unit. Carnivores, that really fast, really heavy hitting melee unit. They can really help us out when we have massive issues with an index. Like our index generically struggles against vehicles, so those melted thermal spears are actually really nice to bring. There is, however, a lot of non-bows, so a lot of units don't have enough effect. Plague drones, plague bearers, all the heralds of Nurgle, even like the huntsman or the stalker, they're not really great. They don't really bring too much unique. They don't really interact with us. The rules would be great if they worked with Death Guard units, but unfortunately they're locked to their own faction. Imagine the Demon Prince with an aura of -1 to be hit. That would be great, but it's locked to Demon faction, so unfortunately that's no good. Contagion synergies, as we talked about, the ability to get some of the units' downsides, which is normally like low AP, something like that, and then give them the extra AP they need. Can also help make units like Rotigus survivable even harder, because you're giving the opponent minus weapon skill and ballistic skill. You can also combine it with the -1 OC and his half OC, so there's good synergies going there. And overall, I'm still probably going to take any of these guys over a goddamn Plague Surgeon. But yeah, and remember everyone, a win for Death Guard is a win for Kirby. But that's everything for the units. So it's been quite a few episodes now on units. They are done now, I promise. We're over units. Like I said, I'm not covering Forge World. So where do we go to next? It's going to be looking at actual deployment, mission plan, mission play. So faction fundamentals isn't over. Stick with us. We'll be going through the rest of it. It's basically only getting started. I hope the goal for this is to be a massive series that basically someone can watch and needs to get everything they need to know about Death Guard and like ways they can play it, ways they can do stuff, unit analysis. I want it to be the most comprehensive Death Guard guide on YouTube. That is my goal personally. But everyone that you can see on here, thank you very much for the support. Nurgle's Mansion Discord, my own Discord now as well, which is quite cool. All these people on the screen are actual members of the channel, so these guys financially are supporting me, allowing me to make these videos, get a new microphone so I sound better, get better lighting so you can see me a bit better. All these things, I massively appreciate the support. Me and Will honestly didn't think it would get anywhere near as big as it has, so we are massively thankful for it. And there's even a second page because you guys are nuts. So much support. Oh, sorry, critting me. It's Are You Critting Me? I'm just cutting him off. I'm so sorry. Can I edit it midway through? Can I do that? I hope that's worked. There you go. Are You Critting Me? But yeah, thank you very much everyone for watching. do remember that we're going to have a basically new Perfect Plague for the Eldar episode coming up. We've got an interview with a fellow who won the first ever event for Death Guard in 10th edition. So that'll be going up at some point. And I'm hoping to have a giveaway soon for Death Guard. Oh, hello, Kirby. Kirby has literally just heard me and he's come in to say hello. But you stay down there, mister. But yeah, thank you very much for listening. Again, hit like and subscribe. Massively appreciate it. And we shall see you all on the next episode. And catch you later, guys. Stay rotten. And we'll speak to you soon. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.